Good afternoon. If you are watching this, then unfortunately something has happened to me and I've been unable to present today. I am very sorry and hope that you get out of this a similar experience than you would get if I was there in person. Now, I've been asked to speak to you today about supporting inclusion from a neurodivergent first perspective. Now, one of the first questions I always ask myself whenever I listen to anyone speak is, why should I be listening to them? So I've kind of put up all of my qualifications just to the right there, but please ignore most of them because I kind of research because I enjoy doing it, not to collect a load of letters. So why should you listen to me? Well, I've been a consultant now for NHS England since before the merger, about 12 months now, specifically looking at the advanced practitioner pathway and autism and learning disability. I'm an autism educator with a number of county councils now and social communication teams. I'm a guest lecturer, I'm an educator, secondary and tertiary education. I'm a researcher. But I also have autism along with dyspraxia, which means some writing, reading and speaking difficulties, as well as social communication difficulties. Now, I come across, hopefully, quite engaging, but I haven't always. I'm 28 now. When I was 18, I was quite stereotypical in my talking and speaking, very monotone. I've actually had to learn, and being a teacher has helped me to learn to be engaging. And then 10 years before that, when I was 8, I was a bit of a nightmare. So partly anyone that knows anybody that's autistic, there is hope. And also I look back at myself and go, whoops. Part of why I'm speaking to you today is because of my lived experience. Now, I always try and get a brain scan into all of my PowerPoints, and it's a specific brain scan. It is, in fact, my brain scan. And I like to put this in because it reminds us that it's not based on a person's personality. It's not based on, our understanding of a person from an external perspective. It is a neurological developmental communication disorder that impacts us as autism does. And I like to look at my brain and go, oh, I can see the optic chiasma there, and oh, my right bit of the cerebellum looks a bit different to the left. And it allows me to remind myself and to remind individuals that autism is developmental. It is something that can, with neuroplastic, that is the brain able to adjust itself, it is able to be transient from one point to another. That's not to say we ever get over autism, but it means that when you meet one person at one point in time with autism, you've met one person at one point in time with autism. As I said, when I was 18, I was much more stereotypically autistic than I was at 24 than I am at 28, and I'm still developing. And part of that is through my research, part of that is through education, part of that is through experience and being involved. So we've looked at my brain. For those of you that are psychologists in the audience, this will probably be more appropriate. I look at myself, I look at many people and go, right, we want a well-rounded individual. What do we mean by that? Well, we, in the case of a spider diagram, literally mean round. We hope that all of the indices, are round about on the same level. So the grey borders there for you are the averages for the WAIS tests. And in some of these, I'm within the average. I'm never below the average, but I'm within the average. And some of these I am greatly beyond the average. And so when we're looking at a spiky profile for autism, we're not always looking at the deficiency model of autism. Sometimes we're looking at the relative model for autism. Sometimes we're looking at the social model or the developmental model. There are a number of different models that we use to identify autism, and these models give us a bias. Each model is a bias, and that none of them are perfect. In fact, no model is perfect at describing one individual. Now, what does this mean for leadership in the NHS, and what does this mean as a neurodivergent first approach? It means recognizing these biases and recognizing that actually when we are talking between neurotypes, that if we match neurotypes, we can provide more effective peer-to-peer transition of experience and explanation, allowing for that kind of immersive ethnographic approach. So what do I mean by that? It means that if I'm going to try and transmit an idea from one person to another, if we share those neurotypes or we have an understanding of our differences in neurotypes, we're going to be more effective at communicating those. For example, it's far more easy for me to explain the concept of evidence between a scientist and a barrister than it is between a scientist and a copywriter or a journalist, for example, because we all have a slightly different understanding of evidence. A journalist will have an understanding of evidence, but may not necessarily be the same understanding of evidence as a barrister or a scientist does. And in fact, there are different quantums of proof for each of those. But we all have this understanding of evidence as an idea. So decreasing those gaps between individual neurotypes, between understandings, helps with the transmission of those ideas. If anybody wants to look at memetics, which is the study of the transfer of ideas, that's become quite interesting as it's evolved over the years to actually include memes, which are funny ideas on the internet. But Susan Blackmore, back in the 1990s, came up with that idea originally. Now, I come to this from a pedagogical point of view, i.e. how do we learn? And as a teacher, my perspective hopefully can illuminate some of those gaps, we call them differential gaps, where further support can be given in leadership. Now, I always preface my talks with, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Now, Dr. Stephen Shaw has a great ability to give those sound bites, but he is on the board of Autism Speaks, which is quite a controversial organization. Please do read up about it, but the actual quote does hold up out of this context. And what we mean by this is I can speak for myself, my own understanding of autism, my own understanding of experiences teaching and being a leader with autism and for other autistic people. However, I will never claim to speak for another person. I speak for myself. And for those of you that are leading neurodivergent teams, each of those individuals in that team will have their own coping strategies, will have their own neurodivergent perspectives, which may not align with mine. Hopefully this talk is to give you a point where you can reflect and go, I didn't consider it that way, or this might be an interesting way of doing things. If it doesn't work for that individual, then that's absolutely fine, but it's to give you, as leaders, a point of reflection, a point where you yourself can then go off and investigate. And hopefully it encourages you to look at the future of your leadership with an advancing perspective. And that's not just because it's a future worth advancing and I've weighed that, I've worked that in, but because you will advance by attending this conference and listening to me. Now, what do we mean by neurodiversity? Well, we actually mean many more things than just neurodivergent conditions, such as autism, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dyslexia, ADHD. We also have a connection between acquired neurodivergence, so looking at learned conditions, mental health. Interestingly, hypermobility seems to have a connective component to it, which can correlate to neurodiversity. Acquired brain injuries. Tourette's syndrome is an interesting one where we're looking at cognitive control and creativity. All of these build a neurodiverse picture. And neurodiversity is not to say that one type of brain is better than any other. It is the paradigm that diversity is an evolutionary advantage. If we all had the same brains and we all thought the same way, we would have a very stale cognitive kind of speciation. And actually, when we're looking at neurodiversity, we need it. And perhaps those that are on the outlier of what we call a common neurotype perhaps need some additional support in order to fully participate in that neurotype, in that neurotypical space. Society, by and large, is neurotypical. But when we're looking at advancing society, we find those that are neurodiverse tend to be those that have the cultural or technological advantage. So we want neurodivergent individuals in our organizations, and we therefore need to make it friendly to be able to enable those individuals to participate in a neurotypical society or a neurotypically developed organization in the best way possible for mutual gains. Now, when we're looking at a diagnostic threshold for neurodiversity, we're looking at about 15% of the UK population at any one time might be classed as outside that neurotypical range. Now, in the NHS, that's possibly more likely because of the incredibly advanced and very specific nature of NHS working. I have met many surgeons that know a great deal about a very specific piece of surgery. And if we were to take that out of context and base it on a child development, we would say, there's a specialist knowledge in that area. Would that therefore classify as neurodiverse? It's an interesting argument, but actually, at the end of the day, it does not necessarily matter. Looking both internally and externally, creating a neurodivergent team within the NHS advances regardless of the neurodivergent threshold, or even if those individuals are diagnosed or not. And this is where we come across the neurodivergent first perspective. What do I mean by this? Well, if we have a bell curve, and in the center we have our neurotypical, and on the outliers we have those with an advanced skill set and those with a disadvantaged skill set, what we want to do is learn from those with the advanced skill set and support those with the disadvantaged skill set. Now, this may be for a number of different reasons. Perhaps they come from a disadvantaged area or a disadvantaged background. So perhaps they are educationally disadvantaged because of, off the top of my head, COVID, because of funding, because of background, because of any number of protected characteristics. If we look outside of that neurodivergent first perspective, we look at supporting those individually. If we look in outside a neurodivergent first perspective, what we are looking at is how we can advance. And as a educator, I look at that pedagogic, my apologies, we look at that from a pedagogical perspective. Now, what do we mean by that? We mean, how do we learn? So if we want a common goal, we want to advance a skill set, we want to advance an understanding, we want to advance, any sort of practice, we start where we have the neurotypical goal. Okay, we identify something in our society, organization, that we want to do better. Most of the time that is based on user feedback, or it is based on technological or organizational advances that you will learn about today, hopefully. And we go, right, we want to create a process by which we can achieve this common goal. Now, this is a very basic flowchart for what we would have done perhaps about 10 years ago, which in teaching we would have called, well, to some extent it's adaptive learning, but most of the time it's differentiation. So we do something different for those with differing needs. Now, as part of that, that would give you a greater workload. We have a cohort, whether that is primary, secondary, tertiary, higher education, postgraduate, or advancing practice. We have our neurotypical cohort. We go, right, for most of you, this process will work and we will achieve this common goal. For a differential process, we are going to go, right, it won't work for these particular individuals, which we have knowledge of before because they've either declared it or they have some sort of gate that they've passed through, or and by gate I mean diagnosis, or we've identified it previously. They are going to have a separate individual process, such as frameworking, such as predefining, such as more time to do something, for example, which in the NHS, where things are time critical, that can't always happen. We tend to notice this through occupational health, through reasonable adjustment. These are individualistic processes that can help that differentiated group achieve that common goal. Now, my argument, and in fact, my paper that's being published, which I will put a pre-publish publication out, or I shall write a conference paper or something like that. I shall discuss that later and get that out to you. Instead of saying, okay, we've got this cohort and we can split it into these two groups, a larger percentage will go through this individualistic process, a smaller percentage will go through this individualistic process to achieve the goal. Actually, we start with a neurodivergent first, common start. And by that, what we mean is we look at what will assist the neurodivergent individuals in our group, in our cohort, in our process, in our leadership team, in our individual teams, in our trust teams, for example, in our publication or anything like that. We go, right, instead of having these two separate processes, we're only going to have one. And actually, we're going to focus on the minority because neurotypical individuals have a greater ability to adapt than neurodivergent individuals. I did this in a cohort. It was an investigative cohort, and we said, okay, we are going to teach mathematical skills to this cohort. We've got our control group, which is in the cohort. We have our neurotypical, and then we have our neurodiverse group, our test group. We actually did this in adolescence. I am not supporting experimenting on children, but sometimes it works. And we were expecting that the control group would increase within range and the neurotypical group would increase a little bit. And hopefully those were to be the same compared to teaching mathematical skills that they should have learned already by using the differential model. What we actually found was that the control group increased as expected, and the neurodivergent group increased and actually met the median average for that cohort when we tested their demonstration of those skills, which was really surprising and statistically significant. And we went, that's interesting. How can we apply this further? So this is our model for that. We actually, instead of doing these two differential processes, we actually did one. And we found that it was as effective for the control group and more effective for the neurodiverse group. And this was in the same cohort. They were taught the same lesson at the same time by the same teacher. They were led in the same practice by the same person. They were in the same group. And so they had this neurodivergent process, and they all achieved that goal, which is ultimately what we want to do. We want to level the playing field and achieve the goal at the same time. So how do we do this inside a very diverse, very massive organization such as the NHS? Well, we are looking at neurotypical start points. If we can identify our neurotypical start points, we can start assessing whether or not we can produce neurodivergent start points. So I just literally went on the NHS system, typed in accessibility, and said, okay, what are we assuming about accessibility at the moment, and what are we doing about it? And I identified these posters here. So we can see, product and delivery. Make sure everyone knows their responsibilities. If a team member does not have a basic understanding already, help them get started with accessibility. Now, you are already doing this by attending, but actually, everyone should have a basic understanding of ability. Everyone should have a basic understanding of neurodivergence. It's not too difficult to do so. In fact, the NHS provides this through our advanced practitioner pathway, through our mental health network, through our autism learning disability network. You can jump in, jump out. But also outside of the NHS, you can look at things such as Open Learn if you want to do that in your own time, or you want to go beyond those programs. Obviously, I will suggest that you go for the internal programs first, but there are other things out there that you can access. And it doesn't take too much time. I know time is valuable, and I apologize for that. But, we have to put some effort in. User research, understand participants' needs beforehand, which we have already come across and said, well, actually, those participants need to be aware of that beforehand. There is an undiagnosed mass of people, especially adults, especially women. So I think we are 3 to 1 boys to girls currently getting diagnosed as neurodivergent. And that's because of research bias, because of stereotype bias, because of funding, for example, in schools. And that continues through to undergraduate, postgraduate, and in the workplace. So looking at that, we can adjust that. We can say, understand participants' needs, but we can also say, understand potential needs as well. It doesn't hurt to be neurodivergent, as we've shown. Looking at content, looking at development, looking at design, looking at testing. I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are some things that you can go away with and go, right, we've made these assumptions, let's have a look. For me specifically, and I'm talking to myself now, talking about myself, acronyms are very, very difficult for me. I often lose track of acronyms, even if they've been explained to me before, because I find it very, very difficult to store acronyms. And also I come as an intersection of many different groups. And so EHCP might mean something different to the NHS as it does to learning, as it does to students, as it does to parents, as it does to employees. you know, give it 10 years ago, for example, we didn't have EHCP. So those of you that are coming through postgraduate training, those of you that have accessed schooling and have based those fundamentals on what used to be statementing, that's out of date now. Context and purpose. I require contextualization. And the best thing for this is knowing, and this happens a lot. For me, I often get managers go, can we have a chat tomorrow? And I go, oh my God, what have I done wrong? If we change that to, can I have a chat about blah, 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 no need to worry, my anxiety instantly goes down. I can actually then start to put in context and start to script and start to access memories to support myself. Abstract or app-specific symbolism. Now, in some apps, in some programs, we have symbolism that means one thing to one app, one thing to another. For example, in Microsoft, there's these 3 dots, which means further information. Apple uses the hamburger menu, which is 3 lines. Now, I'm aware of this, but within the NHS, within organizations, within many partner organizations, we use different symbols to mean the same thing. Can we start to streamline that, for example? Authentication, for example, we have the NHS logon, but we actually have multiple apps through which we log on in different ways and get to the same information. So we have that inconsistency. If we can start to produce consistency, that helps as well from a neurodivergent standpoint. And then path or direction confusion. Now, how can we start to correct this? Well, I've made a note of some of them, but actually, here are some examples that you can take away for you. I'm going to switch to the other side now. So acronyms. Included a glossary or write in full? Does it actually make that much more time difference to say, you know, ASC versus autism spectrum condition if you want to, or ASC versus autistic? The guidance out there is person with autism. However, I prefer autistic person because it is me, it is part. I have produced this persona acknowledging that I am autistic and therefore it is part of me. It depends on the person. Some people will disagree. Who's involved? What's our end goal? If we can model an end goal, then actually, for me, even if I go on a slightly different path, I find that more effective. Again, we've looked at photographic or general symbolism. The interesting thing about producing internal or external guides on neurodiversity is that it tends to be males, preteen or adolescents that you get photos of, and it tends to be user end. We never seem to identify that actually neurodiversity is all of us. Again, if we had a single authentication, that is actually going through the ITs. We are getting the NHS logon, which is working, which is great. Inconsistency, so similar input, framework forms, or report style. I have this all the time. If I need to claim funds back from one fund, it's always a different form to another. When we're looking at reports, it always tends to be one different form to another. If we can start to put similar things in place, or to say, well, actually, this is the same as this, is the same as this. As leaders, if we can streamline our forms and say, actually, this just means this, it works very, very well. Now, I have included a framework here, which is the recap earlier, now and next. This is great for meetings, especially in the world of Teams. We have what happened last time, what we're doing this meeting, what we're doing next meeting. Works extremely well to contextualize in time. Now, Sebastian Shaw of the University of Sussex has a space model, which he works really, really well for supporting individuals with neurodivergence. I actually go slightly one further, and I see actually it should be a space and time model, because placing yourself in space and placing yourself in time also has that moment, and there's kind of an adjustment of that. I call it the TARDIS model because I'm a giant nerd and I like space and time. So for me, it helps for me to place myself in a timeline. So what we did last time, what we're doing today, what we're doing next time in meetings, That really helps. Now, there is a lot more to this, and this is based on the Cognitive Accessibility Guidance, which I put my hand up, it's an acronym, COGA, COGA, which you can access just by Googling. I found it through that link below, and again, you will be able to access it after this talk. Now, general principles. I'm not going to say that it's the same for everyone, but what helps? Well, I find saying what to use and how to use it really helps. So use this program to do this thing. Or we're going to use, so for example, doing this recording, use Teams to record, do this, 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 and this. I didn't have to be anxious about recording at all. How to help, AKA talk. How can I help? Is a really simple question, but you won't always get a simple answer, because someone will say to me, how can I help? And I'll go, in what? In cooking dinner, in doing this and doing that. Sometimes choices help. So I can help you by doing this, 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 or this. What will help you? And actually reducing that decision fatigue helps a great deal. Now, there was a paper out recently suggesting that metacognition and decision fatigue or making decisions is impaired in the neurodivergent population compared to the neurotypical population. Now, I'm not too sure off the top of my head, but if anybody wants the references, I have it stored in a reference list, and I can email you. I will give you my details at the end. So decision fatigue is a massive thing, and actually that reducing the number of choices that can be placed upon a person does help. So I can help you by doing this, 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 or this, or if none of that helps, we can discuss something else. Actually, that works really well because I can choose a menu, as it were, of assistance. Clear content, clear outcome. What do we start with? What do we end with? And then between those 2 points, I can meander my way through, and that works. And for me, that's really powerful. If you are a leader of a neurodivergent team, saying this is what we start with, this is where we want to go, how do we get there? This is what we can use, or this is what the current guidance is, or this is what our current policy is, if you're doing policy assessment, for example. Identifying potential errors and solutions. We don't like to know things are going wrong, but things go wrong all the time. And sometimes we can't avoid those errors. So if we say, what possibly can go wrong with this process? What possibly might be the misunderstanding here? Before we even go to our teams, taking a step back and going, I, as a leader, want my team to do this. What might a misunderstanding be? And then preempting those. That can help. But also putting your hands up and saying, I don't know what the potential misunderstandings are here, or what the potential communication issues might be. Can someone help me who is neurodivergent? Or can you explain to me? Or, leadership is a two-way street. Yes, you are, leading a team. Sometimes you lead from the front, sometimes you lead from the back. And identifying those areas is a key component of that. Now, for me, I tend to framework process. I have a very short working memory. So for me, if someone says, remember what we did last week, I'll go, no. But if they say, remember the framework we produced, or actually, here's a framework, and looking back, I'm going to go back, part of that framework, that earlier, now, next thing that I've just, there we go, just got in the way of, that's a framework that can help process rather than using memory. And then supporting adaptation and personalization. I work in a very strict area of education. Things need to be done in a certain way by a certain time. And actually, there's not a lot of room for adaptation there. But there is a little bit of room for personalization. I must admit, but actually, if there's a lot of adaptation, if you don't need things in a particular format, brilliant. If you need things in a particular format, but it's easier to produce them in another format, how can we produce a process that bridges the gap? You can also look at that as, putting more rungs on a ladder, not shortening the ladder, but making it easier to get from one step to another. I do like that metaphor. Now, those are general principles for neurodivergent first inclusion that I use every single day. This might not work for everyone. It might not, but it's a great starting point to have that discussion. Now, for an organization where we don't have those individuals, let's say you're producing policy that impacts thousands of people and you can't interact with each of those individually, or you're leading a team of hundreds, how can we look at this as, funding, service, organizational potential at the end of the day? We're looking at money, we're looking at user outcome, we're looking at, ultimately, NHS, it's life and death in certain instances. And part of this is using the networks that are available to you. Learning Disability and Autism Advanced Practice as inter-team advisors. Email me. If you go, I don't know what to do here, or I'm not too sure, but I know someone that will, even if they're not on your team, send them an email. You might have to buy them cake, to say, really sorry, but you're in another team, but I'm struggling with this, or my team's struggling with this, or I've got a new person joining my team. If I buy you a cake or a coffee, can I steal some of your ideas? Don't go reinventing the wheel. Brag and steal. If it works for you, brag about it to other departments. If another department's doing something better than you, steal their ideas. There's no such thing as, this is my idea, therefore I'm the only one that can use it. Share. We're looking at flexibility for reasonable adjustments. I've kind of already gone over that. HR is great for this. Not everything needs an occupational health report. You have occupational advisors, in your trusts. Many trust buildings are on hospital grounds, and you can possibly, now I might get into trouble for saying this, pop down to the occupational therapist suite, buy them lots of coffee and donuts and go, how would you think about this? Emergent case studies. Now, brag and steal, I've already mentioned. Brag about something you are doing well. If you're watching this, there's going to be 15 minutes for questions. Brag to the person next to you about something that you think you've done really well, and steal someone else's ideas. In a lot of my conferences, we have time to actually brag about things on a post-it. We put it up on a window somewhere, and people come along and steal a good idea and take it away and do it. Really great. Into teams, that's great as well, because one team can brag and the other can steal, and then this team can brag and steal. A pedagogical approach to education. Education is not just tell someone how to do something and then they go and do it. Education is inter-peer, learning from your past mistakes, learning from future possibilities. If we look at it from a pedagogical point of view, you can start to actually break down how we can access those skill sets and disseminate those skill sets, disseminate that understanding, disseminate that learning to a greater efficiency. And ultimately, greater efficiency means greater savings on money, greater user output, greater output, greater user experience. Linking small teams together across the NHS. If you're a team of 5 doing a very niche thing in the southeast, see if there's another team, in the northeast, in other trusts, perhaps in other health systems. I often look at some systems in Germany for looking at integrating individuals, and then looking at America as well. Often professors love having emails from other countries, and then being mindful of experience versus qualifications. Now, I started off this talk by saying, look, these are all my qualifications. Look, here's all my experience. But actually, we need to look at both the experience of the individual, the experience of the group over time, experience of a leader over time, experience of those being led over time, and we need to look at the qualifications that an individual holds over time. And that actually no one of them is better or worse than another. They all bring something to the table that we need to be mindful of. When I started off, I didn't have any qualifications, but my experience was being sought out, which is great. But beware those that claim one of the three and only one of the three. Be aware that experience is individual and qualification is statistical, and evidence is only as good as the individuals that have been studied. And what biases happen in all three? If you've got all three, you're more likely to have a more rounded approach to, education, linking those small teams, looking at those reasonable adjustments, looking at including that neurodiverse population. Now, at this point, I would ask for questions, but as I am a recording, I would be unable to do so. However, please do email me. I am on Elon Musk's ego trip, whatever name it is when this recording comes out, X, formerly known as Twitter. I have a website that has lots of resources on it, has most of my talks on it. If you want to have a look at that, please do email me. I love getting emails, and I never do. It's like the common thing of, getting posts as a child. I love it. Please do email me and go, I loved your talk, or I hated your talk, or have you considered this, or that was really interesting. Can you explain more? This is an hour of a lifetime experience. I can't condense it. I just can't condense all of my lifetime into an hour. And I think you get very, very bored by it as well if I did ramble on for longer. But if you go, actually, do you have any knowledge of this? Do you have any knowledge of that? How can we, deepen our understanding? If we want to do a deep dive on something, I know that's the in thing at the moment. Please do email me, and I'll be able to go, actually, I don't know anything about this, but this person does. Or, yes, brilliant, I love talking about this. Here are those references. I actually collect a list of references of every paper and every book that I've read. So I can probably ping you something. Anyway, apart from please contact me and make me feel warm and fuzzy inside, I hope you go away and steal from other groups great ideas. I hope you brag about your own ideas. I hope you use a pedagogical approach. I hope you look at a neurodivergent first perspective as something that will ultimately save you time, but give greater outcomes. And thank you very much for listening. And once again, apologies that I cannot be there in person. I will be in future, I promise. Thank you very, very much.